This symposium is the intellectual journey, helping students learn to think like scholars. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our first presenter. This is Craig GIBSON. His talk is Inviting Undergraduates to the Scholarly Conversation. He's a professional development coordinator and faculty fellow at The Ohio State University. So thanks, Craig.
Thank you, and thank you all of you for being here to learn a little bit more about how we can involve undergraduate students in these important goals that we've been hearing about for Heterodox Academy. So I'm going to be talking with you about, it's kind of like a tale of two programs in undergraduate research at Ohio State. And what we have done is to think about the library, because I am a librarian, I'm a library faculty member, the library as lab for undergraduate students, but also thinking about beyond the library and how students can be involved in undergraduate research, in which the library can work with others on campus to engage students in undergraduate research. So why do undergraduate research? What's the chief rationale for it? Well, you probably know, many of you would know, that it's one of the nationally recognized high-impact programs, and others include, I've just mentioned briefly, study abroad, internships, capstone or synthesis projects, creative projects. We have a whole lot of these that we work with students on at Ohio State. And I would say, based on my experience in working with undergraduate research, that it's an ideal opportunity for our undergraduates to learn uncertainty and dealing with ambiguity in research, as well within a structured program and under guidance of a mentor. So they learn disciplinary ways of thinking and inquiring. So features of undergraduate research include learning how to define a research question with some degree of independence, using critical inquiry to shape the project from start to finish. During that process, learning disciplinary methodologies and tools and inquiry, and during all of this, learning project management and time management skills. And at the end, there's usually a culminating experience. They become part of the community of sharing what they learn with their peers or with faculty or others on campus. So very briefly, a little bit of background about our two programs. The one on the left, the Undergraduate Research Library Fellowship, which I'll just refer to in the future as the URLF because it's kind of a mouthful. It started 10 years ago because the library at that point had what we called the Library Research Prize. And that was a very traditional program where students did a research paper using library resources. And we decided we needed to reinvent that. And so we reinvented it along the lines of having a 10-week summer fellowship for undergraduates who were really new to research, and they would work with the librarian as mentor. And so I will be talking a little bit more in detail about some of the projects that we've seen since that time, but we've had 58 students go through this program, and it's been very successful in the past 10 years. Just in the past year, we have started a pilot program, the one on the right, called the Arts and Humanities Fellows Program, for more advanced students in the arts and humanities, ones who are doing senior capstone or honors projects, honors theses, or they're doing independent studies. They follow a skills and practice-based curriculum, and they work in cohorts. So it's not just an individual project. They do have individual projects, but they're working with a cohort of peers with a couple of librarians. And so we just started it last year. This is a grant-funded program that we started. We had 9 students last year, and we have 12 in the coming year. So we've had some essential campus partners to make all of this happen with the URLF, the Undergraduate Research Library Fellowship. We've worked very closely with the Office of Undergraduate Research and Creative Inquiry, and they've helped us promote the program. And then we share funding with the library and that office to fund these students. They get $6,000 for funding basically their living expenses during the summer while they're working on the project. So the Arts and Humanities Fellows Program, we got a seed grant from the Office of Undergraduate Education of $10,000, and then the library is kicking in for the second 2 years to make this happen, to sustain it. And there's also another entity on campus called the Global Arts and Humanities Program, so that's a third partner that we're now working with. So what are the students learning and what kinds of methodologies are they involved with? I'm just giving you a few here. Some of these are digital humanities focused, so there's textual analysis, there's data visualization. We've had a lot of students who work with special collections. They've worked with rare books kinds of projects on preservation and conservation. Some students have interviewed people in the community. They've done oral histories. There have been students who've done geospatial analysis-oriented tools. Some have done thematic analysis of fiction. A lot have done archival research, and we've even had some creative nonfiction writing. So very briefly, just some of the tools that they learned. Obviously some basic ones like spreadsheets, but also timeline software, qualitative analysis tools, open source digital publishing like Scalar, geospatial software, and even some disciplinary software that you might not have heard of, like in dance choreography. We had one student who did analysis of dance routines, and then another student who actually did a live performance with music and analyzed a composer's compositions using a tool called Finale. So I'll mention just a few of these projects. They're of the 58 that we've had. One student early on did an examination of texts from early Christianity and Protestant Reformation among OSU Special Collections materials in order to determine how heresy and orthodoxy were seen in two widely different historical periods. Another one, and this is one of my favorites, a student did a study of photography or photographs from the AEF, a little known period in our history where American soldiers were involved in the Russian Revolution in Siberia during 1917 to 1920, and she constructed a digital map based on analysis of those photographs. And then another student who did a project that I really liked did a study of our digital newspaper, historical newspaper collection from the 18th century to see how debating clubs started in late 18th century England. So some examples of impact. What have some of the students actually done? Well, one student did a Library of Congress summer conservation project based on conservation of medieval French estate rolls. Another student did a digital exhibit project as a portfolio for her graduate school application. Another student did a presentation at the National Council on Undergraduate Research, and another student did one of the Smithsonian Institution's Wikipedia Institute internship projects. The Arts and Humanities program, which is just now getting kicked off, getting started. I'm giving you some examples here of ones that are upcoming next year. But one from last year, a student did an examination of a medieval devotional icon from 14th century Bulgaria. It was kind of an inscription study. Another student next year wants to do a study of artificial intelligence, impacts on creative expression. Another student last year did a project on the history of quilting and the United States and its relation to her own students' family history. So she's interviewing older family members to see how quilting figured in the family culture. And then another student next year wants to do an environmental history of the Disney theme parks. So I've just listed out some of the kinds of presentations and artifacts that they produced. There have been interpretive readings. Poster sessions are typically what happens in many for STEM-oriented kinds of undergraduate research, but we've tried to be as expansive as possible. And so I've given you an example there. There have even been musical performances or dance interpretations, material culture artifacts. For example, I mentioned the quilts. And then some students have, at our campus research exposition have done juried 3-minute theses on their project. So some meta themes from the two programs. I think that what I've seen is that there is this issue of emerging scholarly or research identity for them. They're learning to see themselves as apprentice scholars. They're experiencing what many experienced scholars experience, the ebbs and flows, the pitfalls and the uncertainties of scholarly inquiry, and they gain confidence over time in doing this. They also learn something important. They can depend on their peers, and they can learn from their peers. And then some of them have gone on and written papers or done presentations at national conferences, so they're learning to think about how to build on their initial project. I'm going to give you just 2 or 3 really quick quotes, and I'm not actually going to read all of these by any means, but this student was a first-year student, and this was his first time to do something of this nature, and he just identified that he learned how to do this project. This is a student who did the historical newspaper project, and he had no idea from high school, of course, about what might be involved. And he learned the sense of what it might be to do something this complex and working with a couple of our librarians. Another student said before she'd always just written papers, this was typical, and then she learned to see herself contributing to the scholarly conversation, which is what what the whole purpose of this particular program is about. And this student also says that she learned a lot about being independent from doing this whole project and thinking it through start to finish. So I have a little bit of theory of change here. I have to tack on a little bit of theory, what I've learned by working with these students to see the reports that they've written. From threshold concept theory, we know that novices, students in this category, they're very uncertain about what research is. They think it's linear, they think it's very cut and dried, and that there's not any pitfalls, and so they have a lot of doubts and lack of confidence, a lack of clarity about how it all works, and certainly for them an opacity about disciplinary knowledge that's all very opaque to them. And they don't know how to scope a project or how to plan for it, say over a 10-week period. So what I've seen happening is that they are learning, both of these programs, about research as a process and not a product. They are producing something at the end for the public to see, but they're learning that research is an ongoing iterative process. They learn to live with ambiguity and all the fits and starts, and I call it cognitive patience. I'm borrowing that phrase from Marianne Wolf, the reading researcher, cognitive patience. They're learning about research methods as epistemic pathways. And they're learning about the responsibilities for ethics and research and responsibilities of the scholar as an open-minded inquirer. So I'm just giving you really quickly here an article that I and a colleague and one of her students collaborated on. We co-wrote this article. It's in a monograph from the Association of College and Research Libraries called Undergraduate Research and the Academic Librarian. So we talked about this particular student. This particular student talked about her project, and I set up the whole example of what the URLF was about. And the librarian, who was the mentor, talked about her role as mentor. We do have a URLF website. If you want to see how we guide students, they learn how to apply, they learn what they need to do to actually submit a proposal. So I will stop now. This is what I have to say in describing our two programs. See if there's maybe one quick question. Yes? Are you asking about students who are doing things totally on their own, and that some who might? There are some students who we've seen some examples of this, some crossover between the two programs now. A student applied for the URLF program and also applied later for the Arts and Humanities Fellowship program. And then I have another example where a student did the Arts and Humanities Fellowship program and is going back and picking up the URLF program. So, there's some students who are actually doing both. But since the Arts and Humanities program is really new, I don't know quite how that's going to work for them. I don't conceive of this as a strict kind of sequential kind of curriculum, but I think that they will benefit from seeing longer-term experiences working by themselves, working with a mentor, and also in the cohort program, working with their peers. So I hope that helps. Yes?
Can you tell us how AI is impacting this program?
Pardon?
How is artificial intelligence impacting this program? The availability of
We have artificial intelligence. There's one student here who's actually thinking about doing a project, but we have not actually built that into any kind of curriculum about that, and I think that's something we're going to need to look at, because the university, Ohio State, has said that there's a whole new curriculum built into the gen ed curriculum now about artificial intelligence as an overarching learning outcome. So we haven't quite addressed that yet.
Okay, so I'm wondering whether you're experiencing a problem. This will be my last follow-up. I mean, I have more students than I would like to admit who are getting chatbots to write their term papers. Is that what's going on? Do you have a problem with some of your students in this program like that?
I haven't seen that. No, I haven't seen that. Okay, yes.
Maybe address this earlier, but what are your target journals for undergraduate students? That's question number one. And number two is, what do you think about student-professor co-authorships?
Student-professor co-authorship, I think it's a great opportunity, and this example that I gave you is something that I think the student learned from, but we who work with students also learn from it. So I think that there's an opportunity that's, when I think about when I was an undergraduate, I never would have had an opportunity to co-author something with a faculty member. So I think this is, we don't have really good guidelines in this program about how that works. It's just been kind of a episodic kind of experience so far.
And what are your target journals?
Pardon?
The target journals?
The target zone for students?
The target journals for publication?
The Journal of Undergraduate Research, and we also have in our institutional repository, our IR at Ohio State, students can publish their papers there, and a few of our students have done that, or if they've done a poster session or some other kind of project that can be documented, that's another way for public distribution of their own research. Yes?
To use a term, marginalize, our library is kind of marginalized. We don't get a seat at the table to, I imagine, do this sort of thing. I imagine that our, like the business program would say, well, we do this with our students, or computer people, we do this with our students. And so how did the library get to say, this is something we would like to do with folks? Was that difficult?
So we put, this is in the strategic plan for the libraries, undergraduate research, or this kind of learning. So we built that in, and the library administration is committed to funding and sharing the funding with the Office of Undergraduate Research and Inquiry that I mentioned before. So the library is committed to partnerships in making this happen. There has to be some financial support. I think also another aspect of this that I didn't really speak to is recruiting library faculty to do this. It's often the same librarians year after year who are doing this, and I would like to enroll or enlist additional colleagues in doing it. So there's some issues with sustainability, particularly with the URLF, but we've been doing it for 10 years. The other one, the Arts and Humanities Fellow Program, we are just getting that started, and we need 2 librarians every year to work with 8 or 9 or 10 students this year. Next year it's going to be 12, actually. So we have to do some conversations with colleagues, and some colleagues are naturally interested and some not. So I think that's just kind of a large issue about internal recruitment and helping colleagues see how important this can potentially be. So, okay.
Excellent. So next we have Jeff HORSMAN, and he's presenting on Heterodox Pedagogy for Science Graduate Students. He's an associate professor at Wilfrid Laurier University. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. So today I want to tell you a little bit about a course I developed as part of our Master's in Chemistry program. Now, this was developed in part as a response to a problem that's perennially experienced by small graduate programs, in that it's hard to put on well-populated courses in a particular technical topic when you have a small program. So we work very closely in our chemistry and biochemistry department. We have a joint program with biology. And they also have, that's a joint PhD program, they also have a master's program, and as part of their program in master's in biology, they have a required course for all their students, cross-disciplinary, where they cover topics that are generally of value to any graduate student in that discipline. So things like how to write a paper, how to speak effectively, how to navigate a scholarship application, a research proposal, how does peer review work? How does funding work? A lot of these general topics that probably every science student should have some familiarity with. So the professor who was teaching this at the time generously provided his syllabus and the outline for how this course might be run. 12-week course, meet 3 hours every week, and sort of in a modular approach. And so I thought this would be a good thing to adapt for our chemistry students. Now, one of the sessions, one of the modules was on DEI, so a whole week was spent on DEI. And I thought at the time that I probably wouldn't do this because I thought this would not be a valuable use of our time. But I changed my mind about the semester before I introduced this course, and for the following reason. I was reviewing PhD scholarship applications from one of our federal agencies called NSERC, which is analogous to NSF here. And they had introduced an optional statement for students to discuss the impacts of DEI or how that would be incorporated or relevant for their research. Now, this was in chemistry, biochemistry, and biology, and many of these students are doing molecular work. So there is no relevance to any race, sex, gender type of issues. But every single student decided to fill this out. And so this, to me, alerted me to a serious problem that something needs to be discussed in an honest and open way. So I did end up including it as one of the modules in this course. Now, at the outset of the course, what we do is we start with the philosophy of science. So we set the stage by talking a little bit about what science is and how it came to be in its modern form. And this is quite important for me because I never learned any of this as a student ever, as a graduate student. So one of the scholars we talk about, which will be no surprise to anyone here, is J.S. Mill. We briefly introduce some of his key ideas. And I asked the students, who's heard of John Stuart Mill? And I get blank stares. And I can't laugh at them because 5 years ago I probably would have given you a blank stare too, I have to admit. So we talk about those ideas, and I think one of the key takeaways from Mill is that any crazy idea, there's no harm in hearing it, and you're probably going to benefit from hearing it. And we shouldn't shut it down. And in fact, we should aggressively seek out disconfirmation. How could we be wrong? What are those people who are kind of crazy saying? And is it worth, it doesn't hurt to hear it. We then discussed, we actually had the students read the first 4 chapters of Jonathan Rauch's Constitution of Knowledge. And that's a very valuable book because it's really accessible. It goes through the history of science. It talks about the biases that we as humans are subject to, in particular confirmation bias and conformity bias. And then it ends, I think, very usefully with a description of science itself, a good working definition of liberal science. And that definition that we all agree on and is very valuable are these two simple rules. There's the fallibilist rule, which says that nothing is beyond question. Knowledge is provisional. And Jonathan Rauch, in his earlier book, provides a nice example of this, where he outlines estimates for the size of the universe with dates, and how it keeps changing over and over. So at any time, can you be certain that you've finally found the right answer? So I think this is a really important thing to emphasize for the students, that nothing is beyond questioning and all knowledge is provisional. And that is especially important because increasingly, even from other chemistry faculty, deans of science, all the way up, you hear the term, such and such a controversial topic is beyond debate, or we're past the point of debate on this topic. The other rule is the empirical rule, which is that no one has personal authority. So no one can claim that they have personal unique knowledge or their ethnic identity gives them a certain lock-on knowledge that is inaccessible to anyone else. So it has to be open, contestable, and universal. And again, that is challenged very often in the academy through a couple of phrases like we appeal to a lived experience, or there are certain ethnic ways of knowing that can't be understood by someone not of that particular group. So that is really how we set the stage at the outset of the course, by appealing to this idea that we should seek out other topics. And then we start to apply it as we move through the other modules of the course. And I'll give you a few examples of what I mean by that. So one of the ideas we discuss is that of peer review and publishing, so the journal industry. So with respect to peer review, again, when I start preparing for these modules, I try to find different views on this, and I came across a Substack by an author, someone named Adam Mastrioni, and he wrote a fantastic piece where he absolutely eviscerates peer review. And the key point he makes is, well, he runs through the history of it, but one of the key points he makes is there's no evidence that it really works. We've not done good studies. We see that all sorts of garbage gets through. Sure, you make some improvements now and again. I guess everyone could say, yeah, my paper's better for having been through peer review. But we don't take into account the massive costs of time. It's very expensive for little benefit. And then it gives this sort of false sense that many people say, oh, it's peer-reviewed science, so it's good, right? So again, we talked about these things that I think the students were really interested in hearing this different perspective. And we had them talk to us by Zoom. It was really, really useful. The other example, someone who's at this conference now, Patrick Brown, is a climate scientist. And he described the journal publishing industry, how it can maneuver and shape the narratives of your paper, especially at the high levels. He got a paper accepted in Nature, and he actually wrote about this in the Free Press a couple of years ago. And that paper, he sort of had to downplay certain issues, oversell more catastrophic narratives about climate change in order to get it published at this high journal. As an assistant professor, of course, there are immense pressures to publish in a very prestigious journal like this. And again, he spoke to our class over Zoom, and the students were really interested to learn all these things that they'd never really heard before and just aren't discussed on campus. I guess the final example, perhaps the real lightning rod of the course, would be on DEI itself. I organized a panel discussion where I had a couple of people who are advocates of DEI and a couple who are opponents of it. And we had them on Zoom in a conference room where we discussed this. They each had a bit of time to discuss. And one of these, I think very importantly to note, is our institution's, our university's EDI data specialist. So when I invited this person, I asked specifically a couple of things. I said, I would like to know, you can talk about whatever you like, but in particular it would be useful to know, first of all, what is the specific, precisely defined problem that DEI aims to address? What are the interventions that you will employ to address this problem? What are the metrics you might use to assess how they're working? And what does success look like? When you're done and you can close up shop, where does that go? And of course, this person addressed none of that. And I think they got a little bit of a rough ride from the EDI opponents. Now, I think it went pretty well. I thought it was a good academic discussion where you had that contestation. Now, I think interestingly, at the end of the panel discussion, when it was just the class debriefing afterwards, one of the students said something that I thought was very interesting. They said it was almost as though the DEI advocates had never heard the arguments against it. And I think that is emblematic of one of the problems with much of our current university systems, is that these politicized things are walled off from any critique. So I think I want to pause and describe a little bit more about what happened after this. And I just want to emphasize I'm not a complainer or not saying I'm a victim, because I'm not. But I just want to say I think how these things work are often very much behind the scenes. And so I sort of want to walk through a little bit what happened. And immediately after, I started hearing rumors from my students. One of my graduate students said that people were complaining about me. I had heard about a group of students who went to the biology advisor complaining about me, and they suggested I should go and speak to these other professors and clear my name, to which I responded, we're adults here. If there's a problem, someone would come and talk to me. So nonsense, get back to work, don't think about this. Shortly after that, I was taken to lunch with a couple of colleagues. We occasionally would go for lunch, and we had lunch. And at the end of the lunch, one of them said to me, he said, you know, I've had some people come in to talk to me about you. And, you know, I think you should stop talking about EDI because, you know, you've got kids and, you know, you've got a family, and these things can kind of just go out of hand, right? So you know, it was a bit surprising because it was kind of a nice family you've got there. It would be a shame if you couldn't provide for them. And I thought, well, I didn't realize I worked for Tony Soprano here. Now, I guess I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but it really is an example of, I'm still learning things over 2 years later. Things are revealing that this went all the way up to the top and rattled around at the highest levels of the administration. And I think what I've come to realize is that some of the things have occurred are stranger than fiction. I could not imagine that this is how things actually function. So I actually think in some ways that's encouraging, right? We're doing a little thing, a boring academic discussion can really shake things up. Now, I would like to end on giving you some examples of the students really leaning into this and how much they enjoy this. You know, most of the complaints, I'm quite certain no student in any of my classes complained. It was the professors, it was that mechanism. But the students this year, for example, when we explained how you can be empowered, how exciting and exhilarating it is to seek out different opinions and come to your own conclusion, it's quite a good feeling to be free, really free that way. And one of the students, when we were talking about this, he said, you know, my uncle is a flat earther. He can come and talk to the class. And I kind of thought, oh, geez, I don't think I want a flat earther coming to talk to class. And I put him off all semester, but he kept at it. And he's a really nice and a great student and everything. And I really like the guy. And at the end, we decided for the last class, I would indulge him. We'll kind of have a fun, let's hear the crazies. And so we had his uncle speak to us on Zoom about his theories of flat Earth. We had a medical doctor and actually a professor from the University of Waterloo. I think, as far as I know, the only professor who's been fired for refusing to get the COVID shots. And he gave a great talk full of science, and the students were just blown away. And then we had another 9/11 truther talking about something about explosives used to cut steel and something. But anyway, it was really interesting, fascinating, and I think it shows that the students are kind of hungry for this. Like, they just don't get this anywhere. They probably put in their time at the university. In fact, I had one student describe, I'm just doing my time to get their credential. But they get intellectual stimulation from YouTube. But I think we have an opportunity to provide some intellectual encouragement on campus. And then I guess the final point I would make with respect to the potential downsides, and you can see what happens. There's maneuvering behind the scenes, you know, and maybe you will have some issues. And it does make you pause. You know, every time every year when I design this course, I kind of get a little nervous and I feel like, I should just give up on doing these controversial topics. But I recognize that that's just probably fear or something that's not something I should listen to. I should do this, and it's okay to do it. And I would say that it's been one of the more rewarding things I've done as a professor in my career. And I think that actually you can make a real difference with these students. They see that it's okay to talk, and I think that may be one of the biggest services we can give to our students. So, okay, I will leave it now, and if there's any questions, we can have some now, but maybe you want to do it afterwards.
No, take some time. You're a little ahead of schedule, so go ahead.
Okay. Yes.
I was wondering, we were talking about kind of showing the problems of peer review, and sometimes I feel like I leave the students with this impression that like everything is bad and you can't actually trust anything because there are problems. Like, so how do you balance being honest about the problems with that this is, you know, there's a worthwhile pursuit anyway?
Yeah, to me, it's very much because there's problems with everything, but I actually think I don't see that as a dispiriting. I don't see that as a downer so much. I feel it's empowering because you're saying, students, it's okay to question, it's okay to realize that there are some issues here and be aware of them, and that makes you a more critical thinker. I think now you realize, okay, when people say, oh, it's a peer-reviewed study, stamp of approval, you think, well, I still have to read it and think for myself. That doesn't really mean that much. And it gives students some interesting things to think about and to talk about with others. So I don't really see big downsides. Although I understand what you're saying, because then they're like, oh, can't trust anything. Yes?
Could you tell us a bit more about the sort of procedure that you use when hosting these comparions? Were there ground rules in place? Questions only, no refute, refutation, or rebuttal? I'm curious about how you manage their presentations and then the students' interaction with them and then eventually your discussion of the ideas they present.
So are you talking about, well, I guess any contrarian that comes to the class, what sort of ground rules? So I don't really have any ground rules. The only one we use is the Chatham House rule, just to make people feel more comfortable that, you know, they could speak about things outside of class, but they can't identify people. But I've never had any real issue with, I mean, I don't know exactly what I'd be worried about. I don't know, I guess people start yelling, I don't know, but.
Not so much behavioral, just in terms of procedural. Do you give them a set amount of time? Do you invite someone to oppose their position? Do you wait until they're left and then engage that material?
Right, very good. So ideally, I try to have people from different sides. Now that first DEI panel I had was the last, right? You do that, no one's gonna come. And so apparently I have a reputation where I trick people and ambush them into uncomfortable discussions. Now, I was able this year to at least get our Vice President of Research to come and talk about EDI. And I was going to pair him with Anna Kreloff, the chemist who won one of the awards last night. So she's done wonderful work on DEI and science. But he said, I don't want to debate. I'm just going to speak by myself. I don't want anyone else there. Because she asked if she could listen and then discuss, but he wouldn't want anyone listening. So he gave his talk, and then we had Anna discuss the downsides separately. So it's really just a negotiation. Ideally, you want that conversation. But again, I think this is no surprise to anyone here that usually a common theme is that those with the state-backed political positions don't want to be confronted with any disconfirmation or challenge. Yes?
I'm so interested to hear that it went to the highest levels of the university when it seems like with the Lindsay Shepherd experience in the background, similar to Laurier, they would have to be more ready. I do want to ask about, you haven't used the phrase academic freedom. Do you specifically discuss the principles of academic freedom? You know, I know you're teaching in Canada, so, but whether it's the AAU
seems really relevant to the kinds of questions that you're talking about, and I'm wondering what, if there is, and if not, why not, a week or part of a week on academic freedom?
That's a good question. I hadn't actually thought of it, oddly. I guess maybe I think of academic freedom as more of a faculty concern as opposed to students. So I guess I'm sticking more high-level basic inquiry and free expression and you know, finding out different ideas and exploring them. That's kind of where I've stayed for now. But I don't know. To me, academic freedom seems more like faculty level. Sylvia.
Two questions. One, very thrilled to hear that you've got some graduate science students interested in the JSML. I think that's probably a little bit unusual. Maybe not.
Well, I wouldn't know if they're interested or not, but I mean.
Well, so that's the other question. So I'm curious about the response of the students and also of other faculty and whether you're aware at other universities in Canada or in the States whether that might be a promising avenue to incorporate into science education, hard science education, and at the graduate level. So that's the first question. Then the second question around the DEI aspect, the practical piece you mentioned about the NSERC applications that require these DEI statements. How has that, having that component in your class, how did your students respond to that? Do you know how that's being treated? And is there, you know, some particular tools that help them how to address that? Or how to look at that going forward, considering that is, you know, a factor into research funding?
Okay, so your second question, because I've already forgotten the first, sorry. But the second one is, okay, well, let's stick with the DEI and then I'll go back. So the DEI, your question is how do the students respond to understanding this topic?
And how did that change how they might approach those kind of applications?
I don't know. So I don't know how it's going to approach, because again, it's one class, we do it, and then I don't really follow up much, and most of the students kind of sit there quietly, and there's a few, you know, you always have a few talkers that kind of do most of the talking. I know that after Anna's presentation, you know, one of them said, "Oh, I'm convinced," you know. So I think they just need to hear these ideas, and I think it's just that's the first step. Now, how that translates into changes, that's a whole other ballgame. But we just have to first start with informing people, so at least informed consent can happen. Yeah. And your first one, JS Mill.
JS Mill, the interest of the students, and is there any curiosity or other faculty members in the sciences that, you know, at your university or others, is there opportunity to replicate that?
I don't know. I have trouble discussing this with anyone outside of like the 3 Laurier faculty here in this room, maybe a few others, that faculty just don't, I find they don't really want to talk about this. We have all sorts of teaching and learning symposium, but they're all about how to incorporate social justice and climate stuff into your, so if you talked about JS Mill, I don't know how that would go. I mean, I could try, but I don't think they would take my call, is what I would guess. But yeah, I'd like to know if it happens in other universities or other courses. I don't know. It'd be nice if people hear this and reach out if they do try the same thing. Okay. Oh, sure. Rachel?
Resistance for having this course period. So I'm trying to, I'd love to do the same thing at my university, but I know the immediate pushback would be that our curriculum is already packed, it's jam-packed, there's no space for it. So do you broad buy-in for the
Well, sorry?
Is it full course?
Yes, yes. Well, it got on the books before people knew I was naughty. So I think you might be out of luck. I don't know. Yeah.
Excellent.
All right.
All right. All right. Well, I am doing dual duties today, both as moderator and presenter. So the good news is there's no one to tell me when to stop. Actually, that's a bad news. No. So thanks for being here and for the great questions so far. And I get to give the last presentation here. Preparing for Practice, Fostering HXA Values in Today's Cautious Students. And my name is Matt RECLA. I am, my background is in the study of religion, but my day job is as an associate director for the general education program at Boise State. And so it's sort of, I teach a lot of classes for first-year students, second-year students, and almost in all cases for non-majors. And so that's the sort of context that I'm working within. And I'm also one of the Heterodox Academy campus community co-chairs at Boise State, and that has sort of informed my interests around the class that I want to talk to you about today, and joined HXA, probably as many of you, just concerned about issues of tribalism and identity politics, and really, as it manifested on my campus, what I saw as a lack of dialogue, a lack of communication with between students and faculty, faculty and administration, the administration and perhaps the broader university and the outside community, right? And thinking about how can we have more frequent and better conversations across all of those sort of boundaries, as well as the sort of identity sort of groupings that we may put ourselves into. And so that's the sort of context that I'm coming from. And I want to think about dialogue really in a classroom context here. There's a lot of other ways that that we could do this, but just thinking about this in the classroom. I'm sure you've had conversations with colleagues about the challenge of getting students to have conversations in class, to speak up and ask questions, and that is a sort of perennial issue, but it seems perhaps one that's even a little bit more challenging in more recent years. And we've talked at HXA and elsewhere about many other contributing factors to this idea. Social media that, of course, encourages, one-upping and owning your opponent rather than sort of charitably trying to hear the other side and learn something. Certainly is a contributing factor to how students approach classroom dialogue, and also the sort of tribalism that I just mentioned, the whatever group one is in, to think not only do I appreciate my group, but that other group is different, and then they're probably worse, and perhaps they're stupid, and perhaps even that they're evil, right? And I guess another factor more recently is the impact of perhaps COVID-19, and have students that are still going through our universities that spent a couple years largely doing their education independently, and the impacts of that on being able to dialogue and have conversations. And so really my starting point is thinking that dialogue across differing viewpoints is crucial, but our students are often unwilling or unable to participate. So just briefly, what am I talking about when I'm talking about dialogue? A lot of definitions that we could refer to, but discussion between two or more people or groups, especially one directed towards exploration of a particular subject or resolution of a problem. And what I find interesting about this is it's precisely those most challenging or controversial issues that I often want to encourage discussion about in my class, that are the ones that there is a lot of difference of opinion, and so maybe more reluctance of students to sort of speak their mind. But really getting students to improve their capacity for dialogue is supporting the HXA principles, and really what I think of as higher education principles of open inquiry, constructive disagreement, and viewpoint diversity. So one thing that maybe sort of exemplifies the challenge that we have of getting our students to converse with each other and with us in class, we might look at, this is FIRE's data from the most recent college free speech rankings, and I just cherry picked a couple questions that they asked and put Boise State's numbers up there just to see what they were. This is one question: how comfortable would you feel doing the following on your campus, expressing your views on a controversial political topic during an in-class discussion. 57% of students said they'd be somewhat or very uncomfortable, right? And that's pretty close to the national numbers there. How often do you self-censor during classroom discussions? 65% say somewhere from occasionally to very often self-censor during classroom discussions, and that's even a little bit higher than the overall numbers. And then maybe one more. On your campus, how often have you felt you could not express your opinion on a subject because of how other students, a professor, or the administration might respond? 44% there said occasionally to very often felt like they couldn't express their opinion. So to me, it's not entirely clear what we can conclude from this data. Is this a free speech issue? To what extent is this just exercising appropriate sort of interactions in the classroom? But when that's accompanied with seeing in your class a lack of sort of engagement or a lack of willingness to have conversation with one another, it does seem like there are ways that we can seek to improve. Although I used FIRE's data, I don't think, at least in the classroom context, that this is primarily a free speech issue. Rather, I've sort of thought about this in terms of not really a lack of desire for students to participate, but a lack of confidence in being able to engage in conversation, particularly across difference. Students appreciate classroom conversation, so if you ask what's the ideal classroom environment, like what's the sort of best class you've had and what made it great, it's often, well, a lot of different students were speaking up, there was robust conversation, it felt valuable in that regard, and yet at the same time, there's sort of a simultaneous individually exempting myself from, I just want to observe that happening, right? I don't necessarily want to always participate. So again, sort of many are willing, I think, but unprepared to dialogue. So sort of my suggestion is that if we provide some foundational tools in preparation, students can gain greater confidence for dialogue across differences. And so I just want to talk just a little bit about one tool that I use. So I was able to, within our honors college, we can teach colloquium courses where you choose a topic and are able to teach that. So I wanted sort of bringing my interests in thinking and talking about identity politics and tribalism and things like that, and wanting students to have dialogue around these issues. I taught a course called Democracy in an Age of Identity Politics. I had them read a little bit about Foundations of Liberal Democracy. We used Liberalism and Its Discontents by Fukuyama, and then used Coddling of the American Mind. The first time I taught this course was in 21, so that this text was, still fairly new at that time. And the kind of core question was how or can we value individual and group identities without being divided by them, right? So I want students to really take the lead and engage in some student-led conversations, particularly about the coddling text. And for that, needed them to really jump right into dialogue. But the challenge for me, and I think maybe for many of you, is that we were not trained to teach dialogue. That is, I was taught to, in my graduate studies at least, maybe yours are different, taught to know a lot about my content and deliver that content, right? And most of what I learned about teaching happened when I was in the classroom doing the thing. And so I thought, well, I have some pretty good techniques, but I'd like to, see what is there something else that I could give students that would help them more readily enter into dialogue. And so I stumbled on a tool that maybe some of you are familiar with. Has anybody used the Perspectives program in a class before, right? Excellent. I see a few hands there. This, when I used this for the first time, it was called Open Mind. Still basically the same program. It was the first time that I'd taken something sort of substantive from outside of my own sort of construction and said, I'm going to put this in the course. But it's a online learning program, 6 online lessons that are 20 to 30 minutes each, and a peer-to-peer discussion that is sort of scaffolded, constructed after each pair of lessons. So this is hard to read, but the first 2 lessons, this is the divided mind and us and them. I should say this sort of comes out of, in a way, out of HXA. John Haidt was one of the main folks behind this originally. So in the first couple lessons, they learn a little bit about the sort of social psychology around our challenges to dialogue. So in other words, why is it, right, when I'm having a conversation with somebody and expressing my views and they, disagree with me, my heart starts beating faster or my hands get clammy or I immediately feel like I want to punch this person, right? Why is that? Oh, it turns out, right, that it's a natural reaction that people have, and I'm not the only one that has that, right? So learning tips and sort of normalizing some of the responses that we have. The elephant and the rider is the one that my students really gravitate toward the most. The idea that I think, that my rational mind is in charge of, how I have these conversations, but actually it's the elephant, my knee-jerk and emotional reactions that normally happen first, and then I have to decide, what am I going to do with that? Is there a legitimate threat here, or am I just having a conversation with a fellow student in the class? So they learn things like that, and then the last 4 lessons are around really skills about how to have conversations, what happens when something goes wrong, how do I find common ground, etc. So I had students do this at the beginning of the class and the first 3 weeks or so. And I had to decide I could have them do this all outside of class or a little bit inside. And I had them do the lessons outside, but I gave them time to do the peer-to-peer conversations in class. And really what that meant was, for the first time, at least for me, I had to decide, okay, I'm going to pull something out of my class in order to give time to do this sort of skill building. So it's this sort of decision process where I'm like, on one hand, I feel like I shouldn't have to do this, right? And yet this is a situation that we're in, and I was really happy with the results. It seemed like, in retrospect, it was worth the time, but it was a hard decision in that moment. So results of the course, perspectives sort of laid the foundation for dialogue in the rest of the course. Students led discussions on different chapters of Coddling the American Mind, and were able to engage with each other, and I was mostly able to sit back and sort of facilitate and just step in if needed. And the vast majority of students, I did this course in 21 and 23 as well, said discussion was the most valuable part of the learning experience in the course. And I guess one other thing to note, I also asked them at the beginning of the class, what are some topics that you would want to have a discussion about that you haven't, that you'd want to hear what other students say. And when I was skimming through the fire questions for the other portion, I noticed this question that said, some students say it can be difficult to have conversations about certain issues on campus. Which of the following issues, if any, would you say are difficult to have an open and honest conversation about on your campus? I noticed that for Boise State, 70% said abortion is a challenging topic, and that's quite a bit higher than the overall numbers. And I certainly found that true in my classes, and yet every time when I ask us on a survey at the beginning of class or the midpoint, what topic would you like to talk about, that's the #1 topic. And so we had on both occasions set aside a day to have a discussion about the topic of abortion, and in both cases, I think in large part because of the preparation that we did, had a great discussion about the topic and heard different perspectives, and people asked curious questions about the sort of values people were bringing in when they were, had the stance that they had, and was largely pretty successful. So I was pleased with that. So I taught this course a couple times and then started thinking about, you know, this seems like it's really helpful for students. Are there ways that I could, that we could get this to more students, perhaps all students at Boise State? And so that's sort of where my role in the general education program comes in. We have a second year required course called GEOFF 200. It's around ethics, and up until this year, and this is another story, but it was about ethics and diversity. There's no longer diversity in Idaho universities. So, but the core of the course was really about ethics as it applies in particular social issues. All the courses have different content, but they all attend to this outcome. And they all are small courses that are designed to have seminar kind of setting and have discussion in the class. And so we thought, well, what if we could get perspectives or something quite like that in all of these courses, right? We would reach all Boise State students. So we did a pilot program in fall of 23 and had 15 folks, 15 faculty sign up for that and teach that in their courses and had good results there. And so we did it, expanded it this last academic year. Quite a few more faculty participated, and we were able to get some aggregate data from the Constructive Dialogue Institute through our partnership with them, and just wanted to share just a couple of the high-level things. We had 1,248 students that use perspectives. What they do, one of the things that they do at this level is a pre-survey and a post-survey across 5 key metrics to see, well, how does it impact when students go through the program, in addition to what they say about their experiences. So they examine intellectual humility, right? Affective polarization, the extent to which you dislike or distrust those with different views, sense of belonging, negative conflict behaviors, how do we act to those that we disagree with? Do we respond negatively or more negatively to those? And then finding common ground. And just in the interest of time, I wasn't going to go through all of these, but what we noted, the kind of the biggest shifts for our students, a significant gain in terms of intellectual humility was sort of reflected in the data, and then a decrease in affective polarization, that idea that I should dislike and maybe distrust and not try to have conversations with those that have different views, a decrease there. And then over 3/4, could see the application of the Perspectives program and the subsequent discussion with other areas of their personal and professional lives as well. I like these last two in particular. 74% said that Perspectives helped them feel more confident having difficult conversations. 70% said that Perspectives helped them feel more comfortable working with diverse others. And a lot of other benefits that they described as well: improving active listening and the ability to find common ground, becoming more open-minded and empathetic towards others' viewpoints, and acquiring techniques to engage in constructive dialogue during disagreements. So we were fairly pleased with the results there, and so in this upcoming year, all of the faculty teaching this required second year course will be using either the Perspectives program or another robust sort of dialogue tool, incorporating that into their courses. And really my hope is that then nearly all Boise State students will be exposed to and get some practice having dialogue across difference around these issues. So just the final sort of takeaways here, and these are things that I've mentioned. I think the ability to dialogue across difference is crucial, but it's lacking, often lacking at least, in our students. I think we wish just like we wish that they were better writers when they come to us, or whatever the case may be. Wish that they came in willing and prepared to discuss challenging topics with one another. But I think for a variety of reasons that we've talked about, this requires a level of skill and self-confidence that at least, coming in, most undergraduates don't possess, other than those couple that will always answer any question that you ask, right? And so they need some support for that. If we provide some of those tools, students will gain greater confidence for dialogue across differences. And so I guess my suggestion, and just a lesson that I learned myself, is that if that's something that you want in your course, you probably have to consider trading some of your content time for building up those skills to be able to have those conversations. And so I will leave it there. Thanks, everybody. And I really did forget to start the timer, so I think that was, yeah. Question?
That was really fascinating, and I'm sorry I'm going to ask an orthogonal question.
Okay.
But I was really interested in the Boise State fire data that you showed,
Mhm.
relative to national averages,
Yeah.
and it caused me to suddenly realize that I may have been kind of misinterpreting some fire results. And so I want to bounce off you whether that's true. One had thought, because the Boise State data showed, I think, relatively rather worse results than national averages in terms of the percentage of people who are uncomfortable raising topics, the percentage of people who feel potentially censored. And I think that previously been made even a lazy inference, right? That if a university has bad results like that, it implies that there's a bad intellectual climate for administrative policy, et cetera. Now I'm starting to think it may vary much more reliably with the percentage of conservative students on campus. Basically, if conservative students are much more likely to feel that way than progressive students, then a campus that has a larger than average number of conservative students is going to look worse on that metric, even if their intellectual climate is equally good and their administrative policies are equally good. And so I had that thought, and I thought I'd share it because maybe the rest of you, sort of either were wondering about that too, or like me, just failed to spot the issue. Could that be explained, the Boise results?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we are roughly, one of the things the perspectives report that we did as well, gave us as well, which was interesting to faculty, is that Boise State, it's roughly divided in thirds in terms of students that identify as conservative, that identify as progressive, and that are in that moderate or not sure kind of category.
Really, like right-wing campus environment compared to most of the ones.
Yeah, perhaps. I guess my read of the data was more, I think it's helpful to know. I don't know personally how helpful it is if you self-report that you automatically, that you self-censor, or that you're fearful of what somebody, might say. I don't think that says a whole lot necessarily about the campus climate. I think it says something about perceptions, but I also think that once students have some tools to be able to have those conversations, they may not identify that as the reason they don't want to have the conversation. Like, in other words, I feel uncomfortable. We just talked about this in a previous session. I feel uncomfortable having this conversation. Why is that? Oh, it's probably like I think it's because somebody's going to yell at me, right? Which may or may not be true, but it's a good explainer for why I feel that way. And maybe if I have the tools to have those conversations, then all of a sudden, that concern that I had just sort of goes away. So in other words, I think the connection is a little bit looser than. So I share kind of I guess maybe a little bit of skepticism about what the data actually says. But what's more important for me is that if you see in the classroom that you're trying to have a conversation and people aren't speaking up, that's a problem that you want to deal with in the classroom if that's your goal, right? Yeah.
I love the presentation. I completely agree with you, and I've done the same thing with swapping out some content. I usually take a couple of weeks now at the start of my classes to work on these skills. And it looks like you're doing some really great stuff. At the same time, I have a bit of skepticism, not about what you're doing, but about the measure of how we're doing. And it's not something about what you're doing in particular. This is just a general concern I have. Because I feel like when we're in our classroom, we can often tell if we're doing a good job. But when it comes to trying to I think often when people do learn these skills that we're talking about here, you don't see that right away, but it may be years down the road, the way that they're approaching learning about things or having conversations has improved. I've always wondered whether there might be some way of actually seeing whether people, I mean, not through self-report, but just through how they behave and read, whether they're actually making those improvements. And I can't think of how to do it, but I wonder whether you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think of I showed you a couple bits of data. I think of that mostly as, you know, if there are external stakeholders that, you know, you can package a conversation about what does this class do, you know, for people, then it's pretty easy to whip up a couple slides and say, look at these improvements in intellectual humility. I have, you know, maybe share some skepticism about what does that actually say about what happened in my classroom. On the other point that you mentioned, though, about whether students are saying what they, you know, they think I want to hear. This piece, they do that independently, and I don't see any of the perspectives data, just see it in the aggregate. But I've had people ask me that in another context, and I have them do reflections sort of throughout the course in terms of what's working for them, what's not, and I found consistently, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm convinced that they at least feel that it has improved their ability to dialogue and have conversations because they tell me that multiple times, both in class and then independently in writings. And then even at the end of the semester when they did this at the very beginning, I always find that it's pretty telling if something that we did in week 3 is still resonating with them at week 16 and they're saying, yeah, this was, this kind of changed the way that I thought about this thing. So it sort of convinces me in that regard that at least they're feeling like it has made a difference in the way that they can have conversations with others. Yeah?
Yeah, so as an undergrad at Columbia, I've sort of tried to organize for free speech issues and like promote open discourse. One main problem that there is that these things often become, at least on my campus, sort of only appealing to conservative students. So my question is twofold. First of all, has it been your experience at Boise where it's normally more conservative students that are interested in free speech? And then if that is the case, how do you think we can maybe start to combat that and get a broader ideological cohort of people interested in free speech issues?
Yeah, I guess in the classroom, I haven't framed it as much around free speech explicitly, but just that we're going to talk about some challenging issues and that we want to hear from everybody, and that like the value is in really getting all the perspectives out on the table. And typically in framing it that way, I felt like I've had pretty equal buy-in, you know, across the spectrum. I think when we have conversations around things like abortion, sometimes students will sort of segregate in the sense that like, well, you know, clearly I'm you know, pro-life because I'm conservative, or I'm conservative because I'm, you know, but I haven't seen it be more appealing necessarily to one side than the other, at least in my, within the classroom. I can see outside how that might be slightly different, just in, you know, out on campus, in campus spaces, but I haven't felt it as much in class, yeah. Yes, sir?
Do you get reaction from students that try to characterize students who feel that skill building is away from learning something that help them in their careers, and that this effort to kind of depoliticize actually is a form of politicizing perhaps, and students that just want to shoot for the career and job, and they feel perhaps that even having these conversations of any kind might jeopardize their, you know, career prospects. Is this common, or does this happen?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think like I said, I deal a lot with general education courses, and both the first year and second year courses in Boise State's context are courses that students have to take. So one version of. So we're always dealing with that issue. They didn't have a choice to be in. They could choose which section, right? But they didn't have a choice to be in that course or not. So you're always dealing with that, kind of getting over that hurdle, I think, initially. Getting people to think a little bit differently about this course and how it contributes overall to their education, and how, I mean, typically do that with things like the fact that 81% of students, no, 75 I think is the latest data, at least for our students, are going to change their major. So they come in first year and they're frustrated that they have to take this required course, but 3 out of 4 of them are going to change majors multiple times, and maybe they're going to end up being interested in something that right now they think is a waste of their time, right? So I do think that's a hurdle that you have to get over. And specifically with this perspectives program, initially some folks thought, I think I do hear on occasion, like, you know, why are we doing this again? Like, what's the longer term goal? But what I found mostly is that after they start engaging with it and mostly having conversations with each other, being able to get to know other students and their perspectives on a little deeper level, most of those, in fact, all of those I found go away. In other words, those sort of concerns about a utilitarian approach to the class lesson, at least the ones that I hear. But, yeah. Well, we've got just a few more minutes for any questions, and I wanted to make sure and open it up if there were questions that you had for the earlier presenters or any others that sort of stand out in the time that we have left.
So I guess this is a question for Craig. So over the course of the program, with topic selection, it seemed like a lot of the topics that students were researching were very specific and very kind of dependent on the library's resources and stuff like that. Has there ever been research topics that students wanted to do but felt like they couldn't do? They didn't want to put themselves out there, or is it usually kind of borne out?
I have not heard of such from the mentors or the students. Yeah, I have not heard of any instances, but I have seen many examples where students come in, and it's not surprising. They have a provisional topic, but they have to think about scoping it and defining it, and that's where the mentor helps. But I have not heard ever of an example. The students, particularly in the URLF program, the Undergraduate Research Library Fellowship program, often have a general or vague idea that they need some help with. And so the role of the mentor is to help them shape it and to say, okay, you can do this in 10 weeks or you can't do this. That's happened repeatedly because they're too ambitious. They think they can do way too much, and they have to learn all that scoping and time management and project management business. But I have not seen an example or heard of it where they were latching onto something that was so controversial that they felt that they really couldn't do it. It would be interesting to tease that out or hear that where they had an initial question. That would probably be a conversation with some of our mentors where they had to redirect the student. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions? I had one brief question for Jeff, actually. It sounded like you only, I think you alluded this, but it sounded like you only did the EDI conversation once, in the first iteration of the class, and you weren't able to do that again, or you just chose not to do it again. I was curious, yeah, just how, if it went well in the class, like, you know, was it because of, you know, this other fallout, or, yeah.
So I've done it every year, but the first year was the only time it could be done as a panel discussion. Everyone got squirrely after that. So afterwards, I was able to have, the second year I had one who had just written a report about DEI and the problems with the research. So he came and spoke to the class. I couldn't get the DEI office to send anyone as a counterpoint. And then this year was a little better because we had separate, at least, presenters. So.
Any final thoughts? Any questions? Excellent. Well, we'll give you back just a little bit of time. Thanks for being here, and enjoy the rest of the day.